Spanish mackerel make their way northward from their winter hiatus off southern Florida each spring and ravage most baitfish on their way. North Carolina isn't the northernmost of their migration, but is far enough many choose to stay until the water cools and baitfish leave in the fall. Spanish mackerel, as beautifully colored fish, with a slender, graceful body that is prized for its table and sporting qualities. A continuing description would add that they travel in schools, have ravenous appetites and thrill more fishermen, young and old alike, than any other coastal fish. It should also add they are a preferred guest of honor on many dinner tables. Spanish mackerel are one of the smaller, but not the smallest, members of the mackerel family. They are sometimes confused with their king and cerro mackerel cousins, but there are definite ways to easily tell them apart. Spanish mackerel are greenish on their upper backs, with silver sides and belly. They have yellow, gold spots along their sides and a lateral line that arcs from their upper back at mid-body to the middle of the body at the tail. Their telltale marking is a black spot at the leading edge of their forward dorsal fin. A diagram and picture are attached. Mackerel are considered oily fish and some people consider them strong-flavored. Spanish mackerel are one of the lighter-flavored fish in the mackerel family and are the exception many folks make to not liking and eating mackerel. Oily fish, like mackerel, are a good source of vitamin D, protein, some B vitamins and selenium. They are also a rich source of omega-3 fatty acids, a type of fat that is good for our health and considered to help prevent cardiovascular disease, prostate cancer, age-related vision loss and dementia. If you don't already enjoy them, maybe you should give them a try. Spanish mackerel have a trifecta of positive attributes going for them. They are fun to catch, good to eat and good for our health. If you don't want to rush out and buy a boat, they are also caught from the ocean piers and occasionally by longer casters slinging lures just beyond the breakers. Most Spanish typically mackerel range from less than a pound to around 3 pounds, but there are larger ones. North Carolina offers an outstanding catch citation for Spanish mackerel of 6 pounds and heavier and award a bunch every year. The world record Spanish mackerel weighed 13.0 pounds and was caught by Robert Cranton off Ocracoke in the fall of 1987. The regulations for Spanish mackerel are a minimum size of 12 inches fork length, tip of nose to the middle of the fork in the tail, and a limit of 15 fish per fisherman per day. Spanish mackerel are primarily caught in the nearshore ocean, from just beyond the breakers to a few miles offshore. However, like many other fish, they stay with the bait when feeding and sometimes move farther offshore or follow baitfish through inlets, into the sounds and larger coastal rivers. Small planers and trolling sinkers are used to get Clark's poons, mackerel trees and mackerel dusters to different depths below the surface. Spanish can be spooky and long monofilament or fluorocarbon leaders are considered necessary by most fishermen. 20 feet is the suggested length for the leader, which is between the planer or trolling sinker and the lure. Mono leaders in the 20-pound range work well in most situations. They can be clear, dull green or grey, and some fishermen believe the grey and dull green leaders catch better than clear. Fluorocarbon leaders can be heavier, up to 30 pounds, as it has a reflective index near water and blends in better than monofilament. A typical trolling spread for Spanish mackerel is 4 or 5 lines, with most below the surface and 1 on the surface. Some fishermen use all planers or all trolling sinkers, but I like to begin with a mixture of them. They make noise going through the water at trolling speed, and some days Spanish don't seem to like one or the other. By using both, you can still catch fish when this happens and hopefully realize what is happening and switch the other lines so they produce also. The beginning Spanish trolling spread I suggest uses 5 lines. It starts with a number 2 planer on one line and another line with a 4-ounce trolling sinker at staggered distances behind the boat on the starboard side. On the port side, there would also be 2 lines, one with a number 1 planer and the other with a 2-ounce trolling sinker. The 5th line is a bird rig. Down the center of the spread is the longest line. This spread covers different distances behind the boat and different depths. Trolling speed begins at about 6 knots, and some days a little faster is better. Pier fishermen and boaters who like to cast and retrieve have several choices of jigs. One of the most popular is got-char jigs. There are several colors and sizes, and some have feathers or different hooks. One thing that stays true through all of the sizes and colors is that Spanish prefer their got-char jigs with gold hooks. Gold hooks usually make for better action on any day, and sometimes they are the difference between catching and not catching. Clark's spoons are light and were intended for trolling. With their success, fishermen asked for a Clark spoon heavy enough to cast. About 15 years ago, Clark spoon came out with a device called a Clark caster to allow casting Clark spoons. A Clark caster is a short piece of heavy wire with a small, 1/8 to 1/2 ounce, bullet weight and a spinner. It clips in front of the Clark spoon to add weight for casting, and the spinner adds flash as it is retrieved. They have been well accepted in some areas and not so well in others, but they allow casting Clark spoons and catch fish, and that's what they were intended to do. Spanish generally eat smaller live baits, but many are caught each year that attack baits intended for kings, cobia and tarpon. The baits can be slow trolled, suspended under a float or balloon, or tethered from a pier. A piece of light wire is used to avoid cut-offs from their razor-sharp teeth, and one or a pair of small, size 6 or 8, treble hooks are used. They can buzz a lightly set drag pretty well and are especially fun to catch on trout, flounder, drum outfits. Spanish mackerel are tasty, prepared in a variety of ways. They fry, grill, broil and blacken well, whichever you prefer. About 25 years ago I was introduced to grilled Spanish hobo dinners at a fishing tournament at Hatteras, and they have become a favorite. They Had salt, pepper, onions, some butter, and I'm not sure what else between 2 Spanish fillets that were wrapped in foil and cooked on a grill. They sure were and continue to be really good. Spanish mackerel are one of the first fish of summer to arrive each year, and they are arriving now. The fun begins with catching a limit, and the smiles last longer than it takes to clean up after dinner. That's a couple of the reasons why they are a favorite of experienced and aspiring fishermen alike. Have you had those times when you can see Spanish mackerel jumping and obviously feeding, but they've developed a serious case of lockjaw around every lure you've tried? If you say no, I want to take a look in your tackle box and check out your lures. We've all had those days, and the great majority of them come during the dog days of summer. Yep, that's right. Spanish Macs can be the hardest to catch on those days. The ocean looks like a sheet of glass, and to add insult to injury, the Spanish are jumping all around you in a sort of middle finger salute from fish that are usually very eager and willing to bite. Spanish mackerel are one of the most widespread and popular fish off the Shea Atlantic coast. These coastal pelagic fish are one of the smaller members of the mackerel family and have a pleasant mild flavor. While they are primarily found in the ocean from just beyond the surf and out a few miles, sometimes they also follow baitfish inside the inlets and are caught in larger sounds and rivers. Here in NC, Spanish mackerel have a liberal limit of 15 fish, and many days that limit comes quickly. Spanish mackerel are usually feeding, and once a school is located, bites come quickly. However, as mentioned above, there are times they develop a piscatorial version of lockjaw and don't even look at baits and lures. They usually attack with abandon. These are some successful tactics and techniques that usually convince them to bite, when they don't appear to be in the mood. Spanish mackerel usually feed aggressively early in the morning and often again late in the afternoon. However, once the water warms into the 80s, they sometimes get picky about their food, especially during the middle of the day. At this time there are many small silverside minnows in the near-shore ocean, and the Spanish fixate on them. This will become very apparent if you catch one and it regurgitates on your deck, as Spanish are prone to do. These minnows are noticeably smaller than most lures used to catch Spanish. When Spanish are feeding on the small silversides, they often appear allergic to larger lures. There are several theories why Spanish switch off to smaller baits in warm water and bright sunlight, but the reasons don't really matter. What matters is to notice this and switch to smaller lures to continue catching them. Sometimes it also seems that when switching to smaller lures, it helps to troll or retrieve them quicker. When they get finicky in the warmer water, he uses a mackerel duster rig he developed over the years. Lynx mackerel duster pairs a 1/8 ounce silver head, Mylar duster about 18 to 24 inches in front of a 00 size Clark spoon on a tandem rig made with a monofilament or fluorocarbon leader. Link uses a 2/0 size silver hook and various colors for the dusters, with primarily silver Clark spoons. I often also troll a mackerel duster or two below the surface behind small planers or trolling sinkers. Occasionally these will outfish the surface lines, but most of the time the surface lines catch the great majority of the fish. A great thing about fishing these rigs on the surface with no weight is they can be trolled on lighter outfits and the fishermen get to fight the fish, not a planer or sinker. It's a lot more fun. These are multiple hook rigs that use several small pieces of different color surgical tubing or flash mylar on gold hooks in front of a clark spoon or jig. The smaller pieces of tubing and mylar wraps are similar in size to the silver sides. Actually, I like the Mackerel tree rigs at any time, Clark said. They catch fish all season, including early in the day when Spanish are hitting larger baits and still work when they begin chasing smaller baits during the dog days. The Clark spoon trailing behind him is a larger lure for when a larger fish, looking for a larger bait, swims up. It's a good mixture and I troll them both on the surface and below it. Pete began his Spanish Mac lessons with the standard technique of small flashy spoons on 20 to 30 foot leaders behind small planers and trolling sinkers. Then he talked about catching them during the dog days of summer, when you could see them jumping and feeding, but they wouldn't bite. Spec rigs are simply a pair of bucktails tied on a mono leader and they encompass a variety of sizes from about 1/16 ounce up to 1/4 ounce. Lighter bucktails are small and the heavier ones are larger. By varying the size of the bucktail, you can match the size of the baitfish the Spanish are eating. This longer distance helps by moving the lure farther away from the noise of the motor, and the belly of the longer line dragging in the water helps hold lures, especially the light bucktails, in the water and prevents them from jumping wildly. Use longer lines and the turn around the school will pull the lures into the edge of the school and not spook the feeding mackerel. Running across or through the school will often cause them to dive and they may or may not return to the surface or continue feeding. Another tip for when Spanish are spread across a larger area, rather than schooled, is to make a series of 90-degree right and left turns. Pay attention to where you get strikes while doing this. The turns change the speeds of the lures a little and you can often see if it will help to speed up or slow down a little. The lures on the inside of the turn slow down as they don't have to cover as much water, while the lures on the outside of the turn speed up to cover more distance. If you see a pattern, match the speeds of the lines that are catching more. These tips should help put some meat in the fish box when Spanish Macs get finicky during the dog days of summer. Give this a try. It isn't expensive. I also like trolling some 000 and smaller spoons. All the proof you need to know it works is when your fish box fills while others remain frustrated at the fish not biting. Going smaller and quicker to catch more dog days Spanish just might make you smile. One of the enjoyable aspects of fishing for Spanish mackerel is that it is often a visual situation. Mackerel will herd helpless bait fish up in the water column, trapping them on the surface. Birds will get in on the buffet. The result is water that is actually frothing, especially on a calm day. Just about any lure or bait cast into the fray will get hit immediately. This can occur in the inshore bays, passes and inlets, and open waters of the Gulf of Mexico and Atlantic Ocean. Spanish mackerel can certainly be caught when they are not seen feeding on the surface. In fact, most are caught this way. In Florida where I fish, drifting is a preferred method. As the boat drifts along with the wind and tide, anglers cast lures or free-line live baits behind the boat. Once fish are located, the boat can be anchored or the area re-drifted again. This works very well in inlets and passes as well as the open flats. Spanish mackerel are usually found in the upper third of the water column, regardless of the depth. When drifting or casting live or cut bait, I use a number 1 and 0 long shank hook most of the time. The long shank acts as a leader and drastically reduces cut-offs. I use both shrimp and live bait fish on my charters. Anglers fishing for Spanish mackerel on the East Coast often use cut bait, and these hooks work well in that application, too.